Hey guys, welcome back. Rob from Triple S Armory. As promised, next video up is going to be the disassembly of the Glock 29, the removal of the OEM slide stop that gives absolutely very little purchase on the side of the firearm. And we're going to install the new Glock store. Actually, this is the Glock OEM extended slide stop lever. So we'll kick it off. So 3 pins on the Glock here after we field strip it. Again, make sure it's clear. 1, 2, 3. Nothing in the chamber. Pull the trigger. Pull down on our slide lock. Comes off. We can put the slide aside. Gen 4, it's a 3-pin system. You have your trigger housing pin, your locking block pin, and your trigger pin here. We'll pop those out. We typically start with the trigger housing pin, left to right on your Glock pins for removal. You don't need to beat on these with a hammer. They come right out. If you're beating on them with a hammer, there's a problem. Just set the pins aside. Finally, our trigger pin here. And this one can be tricky from time to time because your slide stop rides around it. This hole here in the slide stop rides around that pin. So sometimes we have to play with the pin and move it forward or backwards. The slide stop forward or backwards, and the pin will come out without any beating. There we go. Glocks are very simple. There's, I think, no, if I say it wrong, somebody will get me, but it's about 36 total parts on the firearm. So very simple design, but ingenious in its simplicity. So we'll remove the locking block. Pops right out. Our old non-extended slide stop. We'll take that out here. And we're going to put the trigger shoe in this one too. So we're going to go ahead and remove the trigger. There we go. There's that factory trigger. A little dirty here. Trigger shoe. Trigger bar. Housing. That contains your cruciform sear. And so, as you can see, part number. This is the Glock 2021 trigger, and it will fit in the 29 compact. And as we can see, this trigger shoe is, the new one, is smooth, just like it is on the full size 20 and 21. The old one that came out is serrated, and it can, for extended range trips, it'll eat up your finger. So that's why I'm going with the smooth one. So how do we get it off the trigger housing? So you simply move your trigger bar slightly forward, and you see the cruciform, the rear of it lift up, and you just work it out. It's held on by one spring. There's your trigger spring. And you see how the trigger spring is oriented downward? It's the new trigger bar is going to attach the exact same way. So you simply hold that with your thumb. Oh, come on, baby. There we go. Pops right off. We'll put the old one aside. We'll take our brand new one, and again, we orient the spring, the trigger spring, in the exact same direction. We move it forward, and you simply pull forward slightly on the spring as you're turning the left lip of the cruciform into a little slot. Can you see that slot right there? That's where the left arm of the cruciform is going to go. And simply pops in place. That easy. We place it back into its housing. Make sure everything lines up correctly. The first pin I put back in is my trigger housing pin. Hold everything back in place. I can look through it with some light behind it. I can see that I'm all lined up. I have a clear hole. And again, from left to right, I'll put the pin back in. I simply use the punch to get it flush on both sides of the hole. There we go. trigger housing pins in. Now we want to take our new slide stop lever, extended version. Get it ready for install. We'll pop our locking block back in. Helps if I orient it the right way. She's in. Now there's a little bit of gap to the left side of the trigger, between the trigger, just underneath the locking block, and that's where our slide stop is gonna, it's got a little home right there, and we're gonna slide them in and line them up with the groove on the left side of the firearm frame. There we go, she's in. Remember, we have that little spring on top. So there's a little trick with that spring coming up here. So we can put in our trigger pin, again, left to right. We may have to, there we go. Play with that, not much, maybe a 32nd of an inch or so with your new slide stop as you're putting some pressure on your trigger pin. And then she goes. Put it in with my fingers. Didn't need to bang on anything. It will go in for you. You just need to play with that slide stop a little bit, because again, you're lining that pin up not only with the hole in the frame and the new trigger, but also with that hole in the slide stop lever. Okay, so that's in. Last is our locking block pin. We'll start that in. Just start it. And then remember, we have that spring right here. If we don't move that spring down, what can happen is, has happened often when people reassemble the frame of a Glock, Gen 4, Gen 3, Gen 2, they'll push this pin back in, and the spring will ride on top of the pin. We don't want that. We want the spring underneath the locking block pin. So we push down on the locking block pin as we popped the pin in, and we got it flush in one shot there. That's great. And now that spring is riding underneath our locking block pin, exactly where it's supposed to be. So we do a little function check at this point. We can run our trigger forward, and we can check tension on our new slide stop, just like OEM. We'll put it all back together, make sure it functions. Then, of course, whenever you do any kind of work like this on a gun, before you carry it as your EDC, before it goes in your safe as your home defense weapon, test fire it. Whenever you do internal work like this, your next trip should be to the range to make sure everything functions correctly. So, that being said, we'll go ahead and put the slide back on. Again, ensure we're empty, because we're going to pull the trigger. Magazine well's empty. Nothing in the bore. Pull the trigger, hold the trigger, rack the slide, and I should hear the reset. There we go. That audible, tactile Glock reset. Everything is functioning as it should, and that trigger feels much better. Let's try the slide stop. Lovely. Just that little bump out on there is all the purchase you need to release the slide, if you choose to do that. Some people still prefer to come over the top once they load a new magazine, charge the weapon. That's fine. It's absolutely fine. If you're going for speed, you want to do it a little quicker, I found I like the slide stop better. But again, that's personal preference. So we'll do it one-handed again. Vast improvement over the OEM. So we'll put that guy aside, and we're going to do the same thing in the Glock 20. So I'll do this one a little bit quicker since we walked through the steps, and all the steps are the exact same in this gun, and that's another beauty, innovative design of the Glocks is everything's essentially the same. It's just a bigger format here. So again, we're empty, 1, 2, 3. Put our slide aside here. We'll pop out our pins. Trigger housing pin, again, left to right. Come on, baby. Trigger pin. We'll do the. And again, we may have to play with our trigger pin just a touch. There we go. She comes right out. Original slide stop. Pop out our locking block. Pull out our trigger housing. Just to show you that. This is all the same. So we'll pop that back in. This is that smooth trigger, so we're leaving this guy alone. Just to show you everything is the same as far as Glock 20, 29, and 20. So put our locking block back in. Really, this is as far as you need to go for changing the slide stop. You don't need to pull out the trigger housing, but I just figured I'd show you just so you can see how similar, or in fact, exactly the same everything is. So again, left to right. Help if I use the right pin. There we go. Glock's very forgiving in that nature. They're not going to let you put the wrong pin in the wrong spot. But your trigger housing pin is the smallest of the 3 pins on a 3-pin Glock. Gen 5's different story. But your Gen 3s, your 2s, 3s, 4s, your 3-pin setup, your trigger housing is that smallest of the pins. So anyway, enough flapping my gums here. Let's put on the last slide stop, the extended one here. Again, we slide it in that little notch to the left of the back of the trigger shoe, alongside and underneath the locking block. There it goes. And we fit it in to its position on the frame. There we go. So that's done. We can put our trigger pin, the biggest of the 3 pins, in. And again, we're going to have to play with that guy a little bit because he's got a few holes he's got to get lined up and get through. And there we go, just like that. Maybe a 32nd of an inch. I move the new slide stop, and she's in. Okay. We start the locking block pin. Oh, I went too far. Back it off. We got to get that new slide stop spring underneath it. There we go. Pop them in place. Make sure all my pins are even on both sides. And by even on both sides, I mean slightly past flush on both sides. Perfect, perfect. Done. Okay, guys, sorry if I was a little long-winded, but I did want to give you my opinions on the parts and pieces and why I did what I did. So if you enjoyed the video, you got anything from it, it helped you out, please like and subscribe. As always, thanks to our folks, our veterans, our active duty military, those in law enforcement, all of our first responders. We really appreciate everything you do. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.